Okay, let's wrap up this liming section by talking about some other considerations. And so when we talk about liming, when do we do it in terms of timing and frequency? So application of lime, general rule of thumb is to apply it 3 to 6 months prior to planting of any crop to allow adequate time for this material to react. Right. So the cost, FYI, of lime materials currently ranges somewhere between about 10 to $100 a ton. So it can be rather expensive. If you're putting 7.6 tons per acre down and you own 600 acres, it adds up quick. Luckily, lime tends to last, it could last 5 to 10 years, depending on application, buffering capacity, etc., weathering, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Couple other things to consider. If you were using liquid lime is going to react more quickly and it provides more uniform applications. It's going to react more quickly because it enters the soil immediately, right? And it starts interacting with soil particles, specifically the acidity on the buffer. And so it's gonna act quickly, but it costs a lot more. The frequency of lime application depends on the buffering capacity of the soil. And it's highly recommended if you don't really have a good grasp on this, is to test for liming recommendations about every 3 years until you have a history established. And then once you have a history established, you'll know roughly when to lime or when to test to know whether or not you need to apply lime. Some other material or some other considerations, cropping and tillage systems plays a role. Crop varieties and tolerance plays a role. And so if you look at this list that I gave you at the beginning of this unit, there's crops that have a higher tolerance for acidity than others. There's likely crop varieties or varieties within a crop that have a higher tolerance for acidity than others. And sometimes you get a response due to lime, and sometimes you don't, based on the type of crop you're growing. In terms of incorporation, the best effectiveness for lime is found when it's incorporated. And that should make sense because you want the lime to act and interact with the soil as much as possible. Now, you can't always do that, right? But if you could do it, do it. If you can't do it, that's okay. The recommendations for mixing lime into soil is to mix it in the top six, roughly 8 inches of soil. Incorporate it. Let's see. In no-till, it's more of a challenge because what we see is stratification in those systems. In fact, acidification typically occurs near the soil surface. And so you apply lime to the soil surface, but the acidification occurs within the soil surface. So the lime somehow has to work its way into the soil to be effective. If you apply a solid lime, you should be applying a powder. If you can't, apply a powder. If you can apply a liquid, it's going to be more effective in no-till than a solid. But keep note of this is that if you apply a solid liming source to a no-till system, it's simply going to take a little bit longer to effectively raise the pH. It's just because of the actions and interactions of that solid phase with soil. In turf, some of you may be studying turf. You want to go into turf grass management, golf course management, etc. You should, if you can, apply lime if needed prior to establishment. You apply it at the full rate. So you'll get a soil test done. It'll tell you how much lime to add to raise the pH to a certain value. Fully incorporate it into the soil prior to establishment of turf. If you have established turf, you generally shouldn't exceed about 50 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And there's a number of reasons for this. But the main reason is you could burn the leaves. And so there's some products that you could use in turf, agricultural lime, calcium carbonate. You could use some pelletized lime. You could even use burnt lime, which is calcium oxide or calcium hydroxide. When you add one of these last two to establish turf, you should not exceed 10 pounds per 1,000 square feet. And that's because of propensity of this material to burn leaves. And if you want some more information on this, if you're in turf grass management, there is information found at this fact sheet at the bottom of the slide.